Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. This is the first video on the Dancing Wings Hobby Fokker Dr1 triplane, and the instructions are, I would say, sparse to say the least. There's these two pages, these sections here. I printed these out myself. I basically did screen captures off of what was available online, which isn't much, obviously. This is what comes with it. And basically, these give you the layouts for the tail section, the landing gear wing, and the three wings. So it's a little light on information, but I don't think that's really going to be a huge problem. It would be worse if the parts weren't so nice. Everything is laser cut. There's a good bit of plywood, like fuselage rings, bulkheads, this is the servo and battery tray, are all made out of plywood, and it's all laser cut, so everything's easy to get out. I have some Ziploc bags here, a couple of gallon size bags, some sandwich size bags, and some snack size bags. And because a lot of these parts are mixed, you know, there's some wing parts and some fuse parts together on these different sheets. And I'm just going to go with it in the order that they recommend, which is starting with the fuselage. So I'm going to, as I'm disassembling stuff here, I'm going to be using a marker to, you know, mark numbers where parts come off. And then bag everything up based on the different wings and different wing sections, like left and right, and just try to keep everything organized, so when I'm done with the fuselage and move to the wing, everything's easily gotten. And basically, it looks like the forward section gets done first, and then the tail section is added. You know, I'm definitely going to be very mindful of the different parts themselves, thinking about if there's anything that I need to make space for. This is designed to be a radio control airplane, so it shouldn't require much in the way of modifications or changes. In fact, I'm going to try to follow the directions as closely as possible, or at least the design as closely as possible. It's designed to be built up with carbon fiber rods for the leading edges. As you can see, there's these basically small laser cut holes here at the very front of the leading edge of the airfoil, and those rods are provided in separate packing. Let's see if there's anything interesting to show you that I didn't already show in the original unboxing video. Rubber for the tires. The wheels are made out of several plywood discs that are laminated together, and then these carbon fiber wheels, or like a hubcap, I guess. It's adds a little extra strength. I think that the plywood's going to provide most of the strength, but it should provide a nice look. And the tail skid is also a combined carbon fiber plywood laminate. Those are probably hinges right there. There's a variety of various rod connectors. That's probably for rudder and elevator. There's a lot of screws. I don't know if I'm going to build this with the wings removable or not. It's a fairly small plane. I might build it so that it's just permanently assembled. But you know, for the time being, I'm just going to follow direction. The guns are already assembled, as is the faux motor. It just requires some painting, and there's going to be a little cutting on the cowl here, which I'll just do with a pair of Lexan scissors. The primary landing gear wire is pre-bent, which is nice. Sometimes it's hard to get something like this symmetrical and accurately bent, so having it done for you is always nice. So until I start actually gluing things together, there's not much more to say. I have everything together. I went ahead and did what little assembly on the motor there is. I bolted on the block for for mounting the propeller, and the motor mount. I did a little bit of blue Loctite on these four, as well as the 4 small Allen heads that mount this aluminum chuck onto the front of the motor. So this is ready to go, and I wanted to have that assembled ahead of time because I'm going to want to you know, deal with any sizing issues during the assembly process. So in other words, if I need to space this out from the firewall, or if I need to cut the firewall a little shorter, then it is already designed to be able to handle this particular motor. I went slightly bigger on the motor than recommended. It's a little, it's right in the middle on the kV. They recommend 800 to 1000 kV. This is an 880 kV, and they recommend a 2112, excuse me, a 2212, and I went with the 2216. I wanted a little more torque, wanted to have a little more aerobatic potential. Already got prop. These are the 2 servos that I'm going to be using inside the fuselage. I'm going to be using a Turnigy Plush 30 amp speed controller. And these are the servos that I'm going to use in the wing for the ailerons. I'll just pull one of them out. These are the same servos that I used on the ailerons on the Raven 1500, and though they're very torquey servos for their size. They're a metal gear servo with bearings, so they're quite capable of handling a much larger aileron surface than what this plane has. So they're going to do just fine, and they're very thin. I've used these on a couple of kits, and I like them a lot. They're not very expensive. I think they're in the between $8 and $11. Got them on HobbyKing. There's the number if you're interested in looking these up for yourself. So it's always good to have this kind of stuff already picked out and handy when you start building. That way you don't have any guesswork. You know, you're not going to get servos when this thing's partway built, because you're going to kind of build the servos into this fuselage. It's not going to be a servo that you're going to take out at some point and then put back in later. Once they're in, they're pretty much in. Taking them out would potentially involve a certain amount of destruction that I wouldn't want to deal with. So, not that they're a permanent resident. They're right here. It looks like they're going to be accessible through a hatch for doing adjustments and stuff. But you'd certainly have to, you know, at least cut off some covering to be able to actually physically remove them. And, you know, if not, you know, like I said, potentially damage the fuselage. So Just food for thought. And they show this with a transparent red. I'm not going to do transparent. I'm not going to try to make this crazy scale as far as its appearance, but I am going to use red covering mostly. Anytime I build a plane that is based on a real plane, I'll go onto Google and I'll search for images of that airplane so I can see different paint schemes and then decide on, you know, what coloring I want. For example, the underside of the wings, particularly the lower wings, and the underside of the fuselage, I may cover in a different color. I might just go all red and keep it simple. It comes with black stick-on decals that are, you know, let's see. Basically, it's like that iron cross for the tops of the wings, the little eyes and whiskers for the front cowl, so it looks like that. You know, the crosses for the rudder. So I'm going to go along that line and use these. They're not decals. I misstated that. They're actually vinyl stickers, which is just fine. But that's definitely the very last thing to do, because I would want to make sure that the wing covering is properly tightened before I put those stickers on. So that's about all to cover at this time. I'm going to start pulling out the various fuselage pieces that I need to start assembling that, and anything that's attached to them I'm going to start bagging. If I don't need to bag stuff, I'm not, like if a page is, or excuse me, if a sheet of wood is all wing parts, I'm going to leave it in until I start the wing. But for example, these wing pieces are inside a piece of fuselage, so these are going to have to be popped out, and I'm going to bag those so they don't just get strewn around. For those of you who are new to building, especially building up an all wood plane like this, keeping the parts organized is very important. A lot of parts, the numbers are outside and not on the piece. So taking a pencil or a fine point marker and writing those numbers onto the pieces is not a bad idea, because they are potentially going to get separated from the sheet. For example, this sheet had already, you know, popped free because it was very thin. You know, stuff pops out all on its own, like this, just in transit. So keeping things labeled and at the very least keeping things organized together, like all of the bottom left wing section in one bag, all of the middle left wing section in another bag, etc., will help keep things organized and make your build go a lot faster and keep you from making mistakes where you might use pieces for the upper wing on the lower wing by mistake. Then you've glued stuff together and it's too late. You can't undo it. So just food for thought. Sorry to ramble. I can see now why so many people have made comments on my unboxing and requested advice on this build. It's definitely a very tricky assembly. There's things you have to watch out for, where if you do something incorrectly, you're kind of stuck. For example, this panel right here, it goes along the bottom of the fuselage here from the firewall back to the wing, or to the leading edge of the wing. The thing that's tricky about this is that this piece here, and there's no easy, there is one little photo where you can kind of figure out what it's for. This is a hatch. So this doubler is going to go on this piece right here, like so, and that provides a stop for the hatch. as you can see, at the two corners in the rear. The slot is for landing gear, and these two holes are the mounting points for the straps. Oops. Be careful about that. Okay, so then for the forward stops, there are these two small cutouts which are going to go here, but you don't want to put these on right away. This piece can be glued on prior to connecting things. These two pieces you want to do afterwards, because you want to make sure this piece gets flush to the firewall. Just line this stuff back up again. There's another, excuse me. So then this piece goes vertically, or not vertically, but it goes on here. It's plugs in here. They show this in these exploded segments like this, but you don't want to try building it like this, building it as this web, as it were, or framework. You want to build it against the fuselage sides, and I'll explain in a second. Another thing is that you have a lot of these pieces are going to be at right angles to each other, which makes some of this easy. Okay, like these two pieces here, and then this piece. Okay, that's going to set up for right about there. Okay, and so as you can see, it's going to notch in at the top, notches into the fuselage. So trying to assemble it like this, yeah, you could prop up one piece and put a block here to get a right angle on it, and then do the other side, and get this squared up. But if you're off at all, you're going to have trouble lining things up on the fuse sides. So you don't want to try doing it on the loose like that. Okay, now there's a few things excuse me, that can be done on the two fuselage sides before you start assembling. For example, this is basically a doubler. You can see it here, but if you look closely at this image, there's no connection between this bulkhead and this bottom section here. That's just air. So you'd have a hard time keeping this thing together if you tried assembling it as it's pictured. So you can line these up against that hole there and attach these right away. There's probably a couple other pieces that can be done. Now these are going to go on the outside of the fuselage, so that can be done later, because we want to make sure that these sides are flat. So I would start with one side and then start laying up these pieces with their assorted connecting pieces and leave the forward bulkhead for last, because that is going to plug in the fuselage sides, plug in here and here. So you can't plug this in while this is laying flat on a table. Just can't do it, because there's, unless you built it at the edge of a table, which it's not really worth doing that. Just do it after. That also gives you the opportunity to make sure these little doublers here are going to be positioned properly. Things of that nature. There's a doubler for this piece, and it's kind of hard to line up because it lines up at these little points here and here, and that's more easily done when this is on the fuselage. So I would glue this to the fuselage first. Okay, and as you can see here, there's a cutout. It's there's the cutout here for the larger section, and then there's the smaller cutout for the doubler. So I would wait until both sides of the fuselage were on to install this doubler. Just a few items there. Let's see. There's some other things. For example, this piece right here is asymmetrical, as you can see. These are pass-through holes for the two push rods. If you look at the fuselage, we have two holes, one here and one here. They are in different places. If you look at it here, you can see that one is obviously forward of the other. One is also higher than the other, just like these two are. One is slightly higher than the other. So the direction that this piece is going to face when you install it is going to depend on the location of these holes here. So the hole that is higher, you want this higher hole to be at this side. So you can use this wooden side for either left or right. So depending on which side you put it on is going to depend on which of those pushrod holes is on the right or on the left. The important thing is orienting this piece to the fuselage sides. So if I've got this piece as my left-hand side, then I need this pointed in this direction with the numbers facing to the rear. If, on the other hand, I use this as the right-hand side fuselage, I need to mount it like this with the numbers facing forward so that this hole lines up for that pushrod exit location. So that's just a couple of the little tricky things. It is very well organized in that, you know, all the fuselage pieces are numbered F and then a number. But stuff is a little scattered, and I found at least one part where the number was wrong. Some of them are very hard to identify from this picture. For example, the F1 piece. I'm sorry about my voice. There's the F1 and the F2. There's two F2 pieces. These are mounting points for the cowl. The two F2 pieces go in here, and they are a pair of tabs. So they're just going to go in like that, and that will be flush to this edge, and that'll provide a mounting tab so the cowl can be slipped over and screwed into place. The F1 piece is this piece right here, and it's similar in that it provides a tab for a top mounting screw for the cowl, but this length of wood here is not shown in any of the diagrams, not even in this one where the F1 piece is mentioned. And this piece is going to you want to do this after the fact because of the connecting angle. This piece is going to connect here. It's going to join these two pieces up, and they may not be perfectly horizontal, so you wouldn't want to put that piece on early. So the F1 and the two F2 pieces should be done later in the build. So let's see, was there anything else? The F48 and the F4s, these are the F4s right here, and this is the part I was mentioning about the number. I marked some of these pieces with a pencil because the numbers were outside of the part. Unless I was looking at the wrong thing and gave these the wrong number, these were marked as F47s, not as F48s. But it's not a big deal. It's a unique piece. It's easily identified as this doubler here. And I don't think that directly plugs into any of the bulkheads. I think it's just up against the side of the bulkhead. It's hard to tell from some of these images, and they're not always 100% correct. For example, those asymmetrical holes that I mentioned for the push rods, that is this piece right here, F39, and as you can see, there are no push rod holes on this image. So just things to keep an eye out for, that some of the parts may not be as they appear. You know, changes get made in the design along the way. So the main thing is going to be to make sure to orient this hole correctly. And in this image, the hole is high like this versus like that. So just things to look for. You know, definitely a complicated model, not overly, but there's a lot to keep track of for, you know, positioning wise. And for example, when you're doing this hatch, you don't want to glue this doubler with this hatch piece in place. You want to get that out of the way, glue that up, and then, you know, move on to these, because if you have this in place, you might end up gluing that in place permanently, and then you're gonna have to like break things free to try to have a working hatch. So all things to consider as you go. I might even leave this doubler off until I get through some of this build phase here, because it's a fairly steep angle here that this piece is going to be at, like that, to this piece here. I'm sorry, it's this piece. That's the doubler. If this was going to be perpendicular at a 90-degree angle, I would say, you know, go ahead and put this doubler on. But since there's going to be a bit of an angle here, you want to make sure that, you know, this interlocking part here is as interlocks properly, because this is the forward wing stop. So if you do this doubler first, it might push this forward. Either that, or you'd have to sand that edge, and that would be kind of tough to do with the interlocking pieces that you might grind away at. So I would wait on that doubler and on these two pieces here that are the front stops for the inner stops for the hatch, until everything is glued together, and then put those on, or at least until you've got it, you know, the two sides done. So that covers that. I would just build with the side to bulkhead F35. Once you hit bulkhead F35, you start tapering, and you don't want to do that on the flat. So in other words, these pieces here, I can basically take these bulkheads, prop them up. Am I in the right spot here? Yep, there we go. Okay, so I can put this bulkhead here. I can put a right-angled, well, some of those metal blocks that I have, or a triangle, or some other 90, something I know is a 90-degree angle. Glue this in place, and then work forward from there. Once you get to here, you don't want to do that. You want to put this piece in and start bringing the tail together, one bulkhead at a time, at a point when you've got both pieces, because you want to make sure that the fuselage tapers in a uniform way. You don't want it to angle off to one side or the other. So that's why you wouldn't want to glue those bulkheads in initially, because you don't know what the exact angle is going to be. But from 35 forward, everything is the same width, right up to the mounting points here on the forward bulkhead and firewall. So everything can be done at a 90. And again, I apologize for the voice. God, hope I'm not coming down with something. Okay, I'm going to start assembling things. I probably won't discuss the process as much because of the amount of description I've given you so far. What I'm probably going to do is take a lot of stills as I glue things in place, and then I will add commentary separately. Excuse me. So it's pretty late. I've been at this for a while. One more thing. and I'll probably should cut this to the front of the video. I should have told you this previously, but as you are breaking things out, be careful, cut them well. The plywood, everything is very nicely laser etched. Most pieces have only 2 connector points. The big ones might have 4 or 3 connector points. Use an X-Acto knife. Don't try to pop these things out of the plywood because you can damage them. Just take the X-Acto knife and just find the slot and then snip that little connector. You know, usually it's only about 1 millimeter, but because it's plywood, it's fairly robust, and you don't want to be splitting the ply or, you know, breaking things, because some of these pieces are, you know, fairly small and reasonably delicate compared to the amount of wood structure behind them or inside. You know, and then you want to go take an X-Acto knife and do a little cleanup on those spots. You don't want things that are gonna, you know, get in the way of getting a good glue joint. So, you know, overall though, I have to say the quality of the wood is top notch, and the laser cutting is excellent. It's time consuming, but it's easy. You know, they definitely have spent a lot of time on this design, and I think it's going to build up well. Once I figured out what things were and you know, this hatch issue, you know, how that was going to go into play, because when you look at this image here, you don't really realize that it's a hatch. It's not apparent. The way I figured out it was a hatch was looking at the photographs. They have specifically this small photograph. You can see they're pointing to the screws that hold down the landing gear, and that kind of clicked in my head. I saw this piece of carbon fiber here, and I was, you know, I'm thinking to myself, I was wondering where the hatch was going to be to access for, you know, removing in the battery to, you know, switch batteries, charge, etc. And that's where it's located, right there, just behind the bulkhead on the bottom of the fuselage. Logical location. Well, that's all for this video. If you've been wanting to build this kit, I'm sorry it took this long for me to get to this build for you guys. And for those of you who are just finding this video, please heed the advice I'm giving you here. I spent a lot of time arranging parts and thinking about how I might assemble this as it's shown, versus doing the traditional build style of, you know, doing one side, framing up a bunch of right angle parts, and then, you know, building out from there. Excuse me. And there's just no way to do it as shown. These are just reference images to show you where things go. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please feel free to leave any comments.